Okay, got it. Uh, Before we start, Mary Verily just announced to me earlier that Nova is got a good program coming up next Wednesday, March 27th at 8 o'clock locally here on PBS or APT on AI. They call it the AI revolution. So some of you might want to tune into that. I'm going to introduce our speaker today as Rob Rodick. Rob is CEO of VX Biosciences, a translational medicine company developing therapeutic countermeasures for evolving pathogens. VOBio seeks to further the advancement of medical science by developing rapidly deployable therapies that overcome resistance for emerging and existing infectious diseases. Rob is the recipient of the 2021 NIH Director's Transformative Research Award, a visiting researcher at the UCSF J. David Gladstone Institute Center for Cell Circuitry and Virology, and is a co-author and joint patent holder for the first in vivo demonstration of efficacy for a new class of therapeutic countermeasures called therapeutic interfering particles, or TIP for short, I guess. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob. Lead away. Take it over.
Thank you for the introduction. Well, this is really interesting. I was preparing this talk, and the subject was going to be AI in medicine, and I remembered as I was putting it together that I've actually talked with you all about this 5 years ago. We talked about AI, and it was a very different time. And I thought, as I was looking through my slides, it became more and more interesting to think about what's changed since the last time this group and I have spoken about this. So I structured today's talk as a bit of a comparison to the 2019 talk that we had. It seems like it was just, 5 years went by quickly. So that's the structure of today's talk. So this is really a critique, and I'm going to make fun of myself a little bit. I was right about some things, and I was quite wrong about some things. The overall agenda here is to first talk about, what does AI mean? What does this word artificial intelligence mean? And we'll describe the current state of AI. We'll go through some of the myths, some of the fears, and some of the promises of AI. You guys have been hearing a lot about that on the news lately. We'll talk about some real world applications, and we'll opine about what's coming next, so that in 5 years we can have another talk and make fun of ourselves again when we're wrong. So that's what we're going to do today. That was the agenda, by the way, in 2019. Those 5 items were the agenda items, and then today, AI now means, at the time in 2019, it was a lot of image recognition. You show a picture of a horse and it guesses it's a horse. But now we have these LLMs, these large language models, and I'll tell you all about those. And I'll talk about the current state of AI and where these LLMs are. You've all used these and seen these probably on your computers and in the news. The myths and the fears and the promises are much more tangible and much larger than they were last time we spoke in 2019. The real world applications of medicine is interesting, and we can talk about what's next. So what does AI mean? First of all, to talk about what artificial intelligence means, we need to talk about, at least sort of agree on, what intelligence means. And that is, everybody knows what intelligence is, right? Except nobody agrees. So I guarantee you, if 10 of us on the call proposed a definition for intelligence, that the other 9 would probably say something different. Somebody might say IQ, somebody might say creativity. And you could, a simple explanation, a question would be, is a calculator that's able to precisely calculate pi and other important numerical results out to hundreds of decimal places smarter than a scientist, like an Isaac Newton or a James Clerk Maxwell, who can come up with ideas, but maybe doesn't quite get all the digits correct. On the left are my two of my AI collaborators. That's Bin Yu on the left. She's the chair of the Berkeley Statistics Department, or former chair. She's the chair of the American Statistics Society and a National Academy member. And Kurt Koitzer is also in the Computer Science Department at Berkeley and also a National Academy member. And that's Richard Feynman on the bottom. You guys all know who he is. They're all really smart people. Are they smarter than Richard Pryor? I don't know. Depends how you define intelligence. I think, what about Keith Jarrett? Who's more intelligent between these two? A musician or a comedian? And this is what we talked about in 2019. I made a little table where I just assigned some scores. You guys might agree or disagree, but I just took a rough pass at assigning a grade A through F for intelligence along these different axes. And down the left, we can see I picked Isaac Newton. Clearly, he gets an A+ at arithmetic. Probably not very good boxer. He's maybe not very good at threat evasion. Probably not a very good jazz pianist. I don't know. And he maybe had some humor. I don't know, but I was generous to him. But he's clearly amazing at scientific discovery. He gets an A++ with a brushstroke. Bin Yu, my collaborator, similarly, A+ on arithmetic. Probably a little better than Newton on threat evasion, and maybe not quite as good as him, but still really good on scientific discovery. Richard Pryor, F- on arithmetic. F- on threat evasion. He lit himself on fire. Clearly not good at that. But very good humor scores. And on and on and you know, I talked about Keith Jarrett here. I gave him some scores. He's clearly good at jazz, probably not very good at boxing. Richard Feynman, good at scientific discovery. The next line is interesting. So that's an ATP48GX. That's that calculator you saw on the last slide. And I think we'd all agree in arithmetic, it gets an A+++. It's the best of the bunch, but it gets an F- on everything else. So it's not generalized. And that's a really important point. It's very intelligent at arithmetic, but not at all at boxing or jazz or humor or scientific discovery. My cat in 2019 was really good at threat evasion, better than anybody else, but not really good at other things. Muhammad Ali, also great at threat evasion and boxing and humor, but not other things. And then in 2019, we talked about AlphaGo. And that was, if you remember, that was a Google model that in 2016 beat Lee Sedol, who was the world champion Go player. And it was a big deal because it was the first time that AI was able to beat Garry Kasparov and chess players back 15 years ago. But chess was seen as more of just a combinatoric game. But Go is a much more difficult game with an almost infinite number of configurations. And when AlphaGo did that, everybody was really surprised and thought, wow, this is a big moment for AI. But AlphaGo still could not, it certainly couldn't box. It couldn't do threat evasion, and it couldn't really do scientific discovery. Let's move on to now. I took the same chart. So the top, say 2/3 of your screen is the same graph with Newton, Bin Yu, I added Eric Topol at the top because he's a doctor, because we're talking about medicine today. But you can see the first, 10 rows down to AlphaGo, get the scores we talked about. Eric Topol's interesting. He gets an A in arithmetic, a B at history, he gets an A+ at medicine, and maybe a C at law. And I added some columns here, by the way. So I added a little more dimension to intelligence. But let's look at the bottom rows, the bottom 5 rows. Since 2019, when we last spoke about this topic of AI, some really big things have happened. The first one is ChatGPT-3, and that came along in 2020. And it was OpenAI's first, almost 4 years ago. It was OpenAI's first large language model where you could type in a question and it would give you back an answer. Okay, another word for that is a chatbot. And we've had chatbots for decades, but it was the first one that really did a pretty good job. And it wasn't very good at arithmetic. If you typed in 2 + 3, it might give you 7. It was okay at history. And that's an interesting observation. Compared to AlphaGo or any other AI model, it was much better at history. But it still wasn't great. It still wasn't as good as an academic would be at history. it started to maybe be able to say some things about medicine that were meaningful. So if you typed in a question like, you know, I have a headache and my skin is red, what might be wrong? It might say sunburn, but it might not. And you certainly wouldn't want to take its advice for any kind of serious medical condition. The law it was a little better at, you know, you could ask it questions about statutes and the way the law works, and it would give you an okay answer. Clearly, it couldn't box. It can't do threat evasion. It can't play the piano. It wasn't very funny if you asked it any questions, and it didn't have any real ability for scientific discovery. So you couldn't ask it for a problem that it had never seen before and ask it to propose a hypothesis, for example. Google has that was OpenAI, and it's the one we've all heard about in the news, ChatGPT. But all that was based on a product developed at Google called Lambda, which the OpenAI programming team then just took that model and turned it into a commercial product with some changes. But that similarly in 2020 had really similar scores to ChatGPT. 3 years later, last year, OpenAI released a tool called ChatGPT-4. It was the next version of their ChatGPT, and it really raised a lot of eyebrows. All of a sudden, it got much better at arithmetic. It doesn't get everything right, but it's as good as an average high school student in arithmetic. It got very good at history. So you can ask it all kinds of interesting history questions, and it will answer in a way that is often accurate. And even if it's inaccurate, it's a lot like a human would answer, where the human sounds very convincing and maybe is inaccurate, but it's a pretty convincing story. It got much better at medicine. So it's able to take input questions about diagnoses, about symptoms, and it's able to propose realistic responses that, again, it's not, you still probably wouldn't want to treat yourself based on it, but it might be as good as somebody who's a pre-med student, for example, and hasn't yet really studied medicine. The law it got very good at. Still can't box, it still can't evade threats, still can't play the piano, although it starts to try. It got really funny. That's a big one. You don't think of AIs as being funny, and you don't think of intelligence as humor, but humor is a really complicated thing. And when I saw the humor capabilities of GPT-4, it really caught my eye. And it still wasn't very good at scientific discovery. Google Gemini is Google's version of ChatGPT-4, same thing. It's just an updated large language model, and it has similar very good scores. Next year, these companies are going to release new models, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I think that we will see really, really excellent arithmetic, better than most humans. Same with history. Medicine, it's going to start to be able to make very accurate medical predictions, at least as much so as an average doctor, in my opinion, in the next year or two for common ailments. The law, same thing. It'll be able to do what most average lawyers can get done, or certainly paralegals. It'll be really interesting if any of these advancements turn into physical manifestations like boxing or threat evasion, or being able to play instruments, and where it will go with humor, and finally scientific discovery. So these are really promising areas, and this is how I think about intelligence. And on the top we have non-artificial. My cat died, by the way. That's why I crossed it out. But she was very smart. But the top 2/3 of the page, except for the calculator and the cat, are humans, and AlphaGo is a model. But on the bottom, we see all these new classes of intelligence, artificial intelligence, and they're artificial because they're computers. They're not, carbon-based life forms, and they're intelligent because they're good at all these different domains. So that's a really important word, right? These are multiple domains. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them written here: arithmetic, history, medicine, law, and I think most people, when they really start to think about intelligence, they will come to this conclusion that intelligence is being able to be proficient at many very different domains: math and history and medicine and law and music and humor. And the AIs are quickly becoming intelligent in that generalized way across multiple domains. So domain really matters. And in the 2019, as you saw, at least based on my scores, AI didn't really have that. But in 2024, it no longer matters what domain you ask these AIs about. They're able to do quite well. So you can ask ChatGPT about math, it does well. You can ask it about medicine, it does well. You can ask it about the law, it does well. You can ask it about humor, it does well. So in 2019, this was how we thought about when we talked about AI. We thought about calculator versus Gauss and intelligence, but now and doing the exact same task every time is what we did in 2019. We applied the same rules. We would copy AIs would copy humans, but now we can do this generalization thing. AIs can do this now. They can really predict using related context, and they can apply knowledge from one domain to another. So you can train an AI on knowledge about history, and it might then be able to do better at humor because it turns out there's humor embedded in history, and vice versa. And this really gets to this basic question of man versus machine. And I won't play this video for you guys, but we've talked before about how there's this eventual state where you don't just have intelligence in a box like a chatbot, but it turns into an actual robot, a manifestation. That's a whole other conversation that we can talk about at the end. So in 2019, this is what I said. I was pretty relaxed about AI. I thought, Ed Wilson, who's one of my heroes, the great entomologist, said, don't underestimate the power of 400 million years of post-Cambrian evolution. And he hinted at his prediction of 30 to 50 years when he wrote Consilience in 1998, 30 to 50 years until we would see AI, true artificial intelligence. Well, I'm going to update this for today. I think we can now in 2024 say we might be there. And it turns out, 1998 plus 30 years, the inside of Edward Wilson's projection is 2028. That's only 4 years away. So I think we might be hitting a point where we really are seeing intelligence that's beginning to be artificial intelligence that's approaching and maybe even going to surpass human intelligence. One thing to note that, the human brain is still really efficient. A self-driving car is 100 plus watts and it can't even really drive itself. And a human brain only runs on 12 watts. So we still have an efficiency edge. And we've talked about these terms, but I think it's important to say, just to remind us that when we're talking about artificial intelligence, you hear a lot of words thrown around, like artificial intelligence. ML is machine learning. People usually use those synonymously. Statistics is the field of the branch of mathematics that is really underlying all of these systems. Data science is another word for that, for the study of these systems. They all rely on algorithms, and they all minimize loss with an objective function. And that means that when you train these AI models, the goal is for them to iterate on data that you feed it, like Wikipedia data that you feed it, and try to get more and more and more accurate until the model's trained. So you have to train these models on real world data. And so I think we can say that human intelligence is the ability to improve predictions from repeated observations of related phenomena. And I think we've now seen that we're approaching that in 2024. And we can define intelligence the same way for both humans and machines. We can say that it's really this ability to improve our prediction about something from repeatedly observing related phenomena. This was the 2019 state. We had chess players, we had ImageNet, we could calculate images. We had the beginnings of language models like OpenAI's GPT-2. And we had self-driving cars. Image classification, of course, is you feed an image in, the computer can tell you what it is. And we had, in 2019, there's a Tesla, that was a self-driving car. We haven't really seen a lot of improvements in the self-driving. And it points out some of the realities that are difficult about AI. AI isn't so good at very difficult road type situations where there's unexpected, there's a squirrel that runs in the road, or there's a construction truck parked on the side with a trench dug up. It's not good at it because it doesn't have enough data to learn what to do, and these are complex situations. But natural language processing has improved. So let's talk about that. And that's the basis of all the AI that's in the news today. Natural language processing is a type of AI that's just like it sounds like. It's processing natural language, like the English language. And here's an example of text from 2019 that was generated by an NLP machine, GPT-2, the early version of OpenAI's model. And you can read this if you want, but it's a cute little story about unicorns. They asked the computer to generate a story about unicorns, and it said, just because unicorns are mythical doesn't mean they haven't had a real impact on history. Just ask Narwhal. Find out everything you need to know about unicorns as you prepare to celebrate National Unicorn Day on April 9th. And then it goes on to say, the first known depiction of a unicorn found in the LaSalle Cave in modern-day France dates to around 15,000 BCE. So I could keep reading, but the point is it made up a fake story. But it sounds a lot like what a precocious 8-year-old might make up. So it was kind of cute, but it wasn't really really great. And then this is another story that's more believable. So this one says, you ask the model to write it in a more scientific way. So this says, in a shocking finding, scientists discovered a herd of unicorns living in a remote, previously unexplored valley in the Andes Mountains. Even more surprising to the researchers was the fact that unicorns spoke perfect English. So it's getting more detailed. But again, this is 5 years ago. Now, though, we have these new class of natural language processing AIs. And an example is ChatGPT, and that is a generative pre-trained transformer. So when you hear this ChatGPT, the most important letters are the 3 letters at the end. The G means generative, the P means pre-trained, and the T means transformers. Again, this is a large language model, and it has to be trained. So they take Wikipedia, all of Wikipedia. They take all of Quora. They take all these open source and some closed source websites, and they feed all this data into this statistical model that learns a very simple thing. It learns how to respond to a prompt. That's all it does. So an example of a prompt is, we might type in, please help me plan a vacation. Here's a simpler prompt. The quick brown blank jumped over the fence. So if I asked you guys what the answer to that is, you'd probably say fox, right? Quick brown fox jumped over the fence. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because we've all been told that as kids, but we also read stories about foxes, and we read that they're quick, and we read about fences, and it makes sense to stick the word fox in there. You wouldn't write the quick brown coffee cup jumped over the fence, because a coffee cup can't jump. But you can actually train these large language models to accurately predict the next word. Fox, if you give it enough stories and feed in all the Shakespeare and all the Wikipedia, and you type in the quick brown blank jumped over the fence, it can fill in the word fox. So what it's doing is transforming an input, what we typed in, to an output. And in this case, the output is just, it puts the word fox, it proposes the word fox for the blank space. And the last word in the name of these models, GPT, is generative. So it generates new output from input. So let's review this. Just recap. All these models you're seeing on the news that everybody's talking about, all they are generative pre-trained transformers. Statistical models that are fed a bunch of data, and they're trained just like an infant's trained, or like anything that doesn't know anything is trained. And they consume all this text, and they learn how to propose the next word. That's it. That's all they do. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound very smart, right? That's not intelligence. That's not all the things. That's not humor and medicine and law and all the things we talked about. But if you use a lot of training, if you use billions and billions of sentences and words and across lots of different domains, the law, medicine, literature, comedy, and you feed all this in, You could then prompt the system by typing in one of the first 10 words here. You could say, one of the easiest ways to cut down on dinner costs is to, and hit return. That's your prompt. And it fills in everything that's underlined. Go for cheaper cuts of meat, or utilizing more expensive ones in creative ways. Try adding ground beef, turkey, or chicken to help bulk out old standbys. Try roasting a whole chicken, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all it's doing, all these new models are doing is completing the next blank. But the more you train them, the longer that blank can be. And that blank can become not just one word or two words, but entire sentences, paragraphs, and in fact, entire books that they can now write. So this is a subtle but very important concept. All these AIs that you're seeing right now, they only do one thing. You give them a prompt and they respond to the prompt by proposing the next, they call it a symbol or a token. And that next symbol in a simple case can just be one word, like the quick brown fox. But it could also be thousands of words. And it's proposing the words in a way that is most like all the stuff it learned based on the context you provide in your prompt. And that's what we're seeing in the news today. Those are the models that we're hearing about. Those are the models that all the hype is about and all the fears are about. These new models in 2024 are doing things that were not at all possible in 2019. They are writing essays that are hard to distinguish from humans. If you ask ChatGPT to write an essay, it can write one that's pretty hard to tell it wasn't written by a human. It can write news articles. It can write legal briefs. It can write medical opinions. And it can generate now, in the last couple of months, it can even generate images and videos that rival work that are done by trained graphic artists. I saw one yesterday of an elephant covered by leaves. And the elephant's skin actually was these big leaves, and it was walking through the forest. So lots has changed since 2019. We have really, it's this domain adaptation is no longer limited. Now you can train AIs on history and law and medicine. It can then it just all of a sudden knows how to be funny. It can do humor. And it used to be in 2019 that AI was really just about searching data. It could kind of search through stuff you trained it on, but now it can contextually do contextual representation, which is a feat that it wasn't able to do before. Self-driving cars, robots still really haven't progressed very much, but that may be coming next. So what are the fears? In 2019, we talked about this, and I said, "Oh, fear is AI will dominate the world. Sure, one day, don't hold your breath." Well, it's looking the rate of growth is very fast, and now you could imagine with the growth of AI that it could become it's certainly going to be a very important thing in our lives pretty quickly. People are concerned about losing jobs, and people don't want the economy to suffer from this, and the repeated tasks really are the biggest fears. Tesla had made a robot to put a screw in the hole, but it didn't work yet. So it's hard to, some of these things, the dexterity of human fingers is very significant, and it's hard to reproduce that with a robot. We're not quite there yet. Everybody thought AI was going to cure all ills, but it's grown up. In 2019, I said that it was like a highly energetic 4-year-old, but it's more like a 12-year-old now. These AI models are quite intelligent. And if you had AI right now, today, you can replicate it, and it's as if you had 100,000 12-year-olds in your biology lab. So you can have it do things for you that maybe can take away some of the humans' jobs. How is this used to make therapeutics? Well, a couple of general classes. The first one is drug repurposing. So there's a system called LoveNet that already has approved new indications. And the approach here is pretty simple. It's to take existing drugs that are FDA approved and repurpose them for other indications. And that's a nice idea because, of course, smooths the approval path, and doctors can then prescribe off-label if they want. but it gives a very quick way to search existing drugs and see if they could be useful for other unmet medical needs. And the way it does this is you can feed in tons and tons and tons of patient data on who has taken medications for what, and looked at the results of the patients' blood panels and other ongoing data that's collected on these patients, and then ask the system whether, if somebody took a statin, for example, for cardiovascular purposes, did it maybe result in affecting glucose? And could you maybe prescribe statins for diabetes, for example? So these are fascinating new AIs that are now being used actively to come up with repurposed drugs. The second class of using AI for therapeutics is to target, come up with proposals for new targets, new therapeutic targets, candidates. And this is, for example, protein screening, testing different protein configurations to see what the therapeutic efficacy might be. There's fundamental design like AlphaFold. That's a really interesting technology that has now superseded humans and X-ray crystallography to be able to predict the way the proteins fold. And that's really important in understanding the interaction of medicines and disease progression. And there is the first new AI derived drug is now it has regulatory approval. It's from a company called In Silico, and it's for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So that's a pretty exciting milestone. We now have a drug that is a result of AI, and it looks like it has quite a bit of promise for that unmet medical need. This is a picture of a protein that's folded by AlphaFold. So you can feed in all the residues, and it will estimate for you the conformation of that protein, which is so important for vaccine design and other things. And what's coming next with using AI in medicine? We're going to have significantly more fundamental design. We're going to see self-interfering RNA, vaccines, host factor targeting. Medical diagnoses are going to become much more accurate, and you're going to see more and more first-line medical professionals such as PAs relying on AI to help improve diagnoses for particularly GP situations where it's a first gatekeeper for the patient, and for predicting outcomes for things like treatment of diseases with different drugs. So AI is going to, over the next couple of years, is going to really become a very powerful tool to predict the disease trajectories. Radiology, it has already revolutionized and will continue to do so for identifying everything from lung infections to other MRI, broken bones, all of the above. AI's ability to be trained on thousands of images that have been analyzed by a human, and then use that training to analyze a new X-ray or MRI image is going to exceed humans. Most certainly going to exceed a radiologist's ability to make a diagnosis in the near term. And assisted surgery is a really exciting area. So that's, for an example of that, is real-time guidance using or laparoscopic and other surgery precision guidance of surgical implements by the surgeon. So it's helping you avoid arteries and nerves that are important to when you're performing surgery. And what's next generally? Well, I have some thoughts about this, and I want to hear all of your thoughts. And I'll wrap up here by saying that I don't know if any of you guys saw this in the news, but last year there was a really big fight over OpenAI. And OpenAI is run by a guy named Sam Altman, who is a very talented business person. Not really a technologist, but he's a really smart business guy. And the board of OpenAI was founded back 5 years ago by Elon Musk and others, and its mission was to be open. Its mission was to be very transparent and to share everything it was doing. And of course, OpenAI turned into a for-profit company because everybody wants money. That's just the way the world is. And the board tried to get rid of this guy, Sam Altman, because Sam Altman was sharing the models with Microsoft that had cut these big business deals, and the board felt that he was not being safe with the AI, that he was being too reckless with the AI, that it was actually dangerous. So OpenAI has 600 employees, and 500 of them signed a petition saying that if they didn't hire Sam, the board kicked out Sam Altman, and the employee said, if you don't hire him back, we're going to all quit. And it was interesting because a lot of people were really happy about this and happy that they thought the board had done something extreme. But what was really interesting to me is, of those 500 people that signed the petition, I know a lot of the people that work at these companies. They're 28-year-old computer science graduates, nice people, but they're not. They haven't studied biology. They haven't studied competitive systems in a resource constrained ecosystem. And I think it's and the reason they've signed the petition is they wanted their options. They want their money, right? Because if OpenAI doesn't pursue profit, then their options aren't going to be worth anything. So I thought it was a really sad moment that as much as I'm a fan of for-profit enterprises, and I love AI and technology, the risks here are so great that it is very unfortunate that the progress of this entire industry is clearly governed by the normal corporate profit motivations, which in most cases I don't mind. But in the case of AI, it really needs to have governance from people who are worried about humanity and not worried about the profit of the companies. So that's my own view, but I'm really curious to hear all of your views and what's going to happen next. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up for discussion. And I guess I'll just pose the question. Maybe you guys might have other questions, but I'm curious to hear what all of you with your medical backgrounds and your medical science backgrounds think when you see these human-built, human-designed computer systems that are now beginning to exceed our own intelligence. And I'll just mention one more thing that you guys might want to check out on your own. There was Eric Topol is a doctor that most of you probably know about. He tweets all the time about. He's a super smart guy down at Scripps in San Diego, and he interviewed Jeff Hinton, who's the father. People always give Jeff Hinton the credit for being the father of AI, and Hinton quit Google 2 years ago. He claimed he quit because he's just getting old. I think he quit because he was very scared about what he created. And when he got on this podcast from Eric Topol, he said, well, I like to talk about medicine because AI can do so many good things. And he's right, it can. In medicine, AI can be really helpful and help a lot of people. But the thing I noticed is, in my opinion, Hinton's kind of hiding behind all the good that AI can do in medicine and not talking about all the other dangers that it can pose. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as people who have medical backgrounds and are trained in things other than computer science.
Rob, let me just start by, well, first of all, if you all want to ask a question, be sure you unmute yourself before you do. But my opening question to you is, should there be governance from the government? Should the government get involved in this?
My opinion, and I'm not an expert on. I don't think there are experts on this. This is such a complex topic of computer science and intelligence and biology and governance that I think it's fair to say no one is an expert on this topic. But my 2 cents on the topic is that the cat may be out of the bag already. It may be too late for effective governance. The problem with governance is, so I think we absolutely do. Ideally, yes, it would be great. The perfect world would be the United States, China, Russia, and all the industrialized nations that have the capability of building AI come together and agree that this is such a serious technology that we have to govern this as a group of people. The whole world has to regulate this. That would be great. We can't even agree in our Congress on what color to put a street sign. So we're never going to get that kind of global agreement. And the problem is that if any one country puts limitations, the other countries are not going to put limitations. So it's very much like a nuclear arms race, that if the United States decided in 1950 not to build more atomic weapons, the fear was, well, the Russians will just do it and not tell us. And then in 20 years, they're gonna have a lot more than us. So it ended up with this arms race, and we're in the exact same spot. And I think that's what's hard about governance, is there is somebody a lot smarter than me would have to figure out how to get all these countries to agree to govern in a sensible way, to regulate in a sensible way.
Rob, I wanted to ask a question about the medical diagnosis, where the AI is, by that new term, your co-pilot, and knows more about all the literature about a particular topic than you could ever read in your own lifetime. And it bases its advice on what it has gleaned from those conclusions of all those articles. Now, if you are a physician with a difficult problem, you consult a specialist who has been dealing in that situation and who has had experience in what works and what doesn't work, and that may or may not jive with what the conclusions are. So AI absorbs a lot of information, but has no discrimination as to what's a valid study from an invalid study. Editorial boards reject articles written decades ago because they found that there was a flaw that had only turned up in recent things. So the reliability on an all-knowing AI is a flaw. Have I made myself clear?
I understand what you're saying, Ron, and I agree with you. It is what they call, there's a term for it in the industry. The computer scientists call it AI hallucination. AIs will hallucinate. So you can ask it a question. You can say, I have a patient, they're presenting these symptoms. They have an elevated A1C. They are 6 feet 1 tall. They're 63 years old, and they have bruising on their left arm. And it can come back and say, well, clearly this patient is a boxer who ate ice cream yesterday. And so AIs will hallucinate. And all I can say, so I agree with you, Ron. I think it's extremely, one of the biggest problems right now is if you're going to use AI to help you generate ideas of what say in this case, the patient's disease might be, you have to be able to discriminate the bad suggestions it has from the good ones. It might have a good idea that you didn't think of. It might be a nice tool for a clinician. But I think it's really tough to not get talked into the wrong diagnosis by the AI. And so I don't have a good answer for you other than to say I agree with you. It's a known problem in the industry, and the computer scientists are working on this. They're trying to find ways to program these AIs to hallucinate less. I'll share one other comment on this topic, which is that humans hallucinate also. So it is possible to go to a specialist who's not very good, and they can come up with a bad suggestion. So I actually think AIs they're kind of doing a lot of what humans do. Humans are really overconfident often. And I think AIs are also overconfident often. I agree with your assumption.
I think one of the problems in medicine and in any use of artificial intelligence is how people use it. For example, in medicine, it could, if presented with the appropriate history and physical findings, could give a differential diagnosis, which the physician could then consider, if he hasn't already considered them, and go from there, rather than to depend upon a single diagnosis given by the AI. Similarly, as was presented yesterday in Medical Grand Rounds, you may have a patient who has X symptoms, who hasn't responded to a whole litany of medications and treatments, and the people are very concerned. And what they did was they had the AI look at all the treatments that had ever been used for this, from the most common to the least common, and they could then, try different things that hadn't been tried before. And it turns out in this particular case, they found something that actually worked. So it's a question of how you use it. You can use it as a helper rather than as the definitive. But people are going to abuse it. And that's one of the problems where the government isn't going to help control things, because, anything can be good. And the benefits of this are terrific, but the abuses are infinite. I mean, they can be used, it can be used, and I don't see how you can control it really with a government rule or law, because things change.
I would agree with all that. Those are all great points.
I was exposed to computers in medicine in 1967.
Mm.
And from a human standpoint, I have to confess that I was intimidated and very uncomfortable. And yet, the fact of the matter is that it was very effective. And over the years, there have been protocols that were proposed, and if you look at them carefully, they turn out to be pretty good. And so I think the physician's ego can get bruised by AI and computers, and there's no question in my mind that they can be used in a positive way. And so I would spend most of my energy trying to find the most effective ways to use it rather than to deny its potential.
Mm.
And you better be ready for it, because it looks like it could easily swamp the boat. So I'd say pay attention and have a positive attitude.
Well, that's great advice. I'll try to take your advice. I've been a little bit saddened by all this argument about whether they're going to take over the world and fight with humans and all this. And people keep saying, well, think of all the good it can do. It could end up doing everything for you, and you could just sit around while it mows your lawn and paints your house and does your work for you and generates income. And I thought to myself, gosh, that sounds horrible. I mean, humans need a sense of purpose when they wake up in the morning. And I think that's something that's not talked about enough. You talk about doctors' egos being bruised. I'm sure you're right. There's a lot of ego there. But part of it also is, do we really want to live in a world where we don't have a sense of purpose? And I think, for me anyway, as much as I love technology, I'd go out of my mind if I didn't have something to do every day and have a purpose.
What are the risks of AI? We hear about it a lot. I'm going to something this summer about it, but I'm too ignorant of computers and things. Is it just that people will take the information and use it in evil ways?
A great question. Again, I mean, people a lot more qualified than me to opine on this, but I'll just briefly respond. I think the risks that I've heard about are in two different kind of categories. There's these incremental risks, like what you just said. People will use it to generate fake news, for example. People will set up AIs that'll make robocalls before an election and try to disseminate false information. People will use AIs, this whole deep fake thing. People use AIs to impersonate politicians or government leaders and then put out podcasts, and everybody will show the president of the United States doing something crazy, and people believe it for a minute, maybe at an important time. So I think there are those types of risks. There's obviously the misuse risk that we've talked about, the misdiagnosis risk, all that sort of thing. But then there's a different class of risks, which I think is this notion of exponential intelligence growth, and that's really the big risk in my mind. And That is if you from what we talked about today, when we compared 2024 to where we were in 2019, it's a stunning growth in the capability of these systems in just 5 years. So the thing about these systems is they can improve themselves. That's the part that I think is most concerning to me. And if you're a biologist and you study competitive systems, people like to come out and say, well, AI is, you'll hear all these people, they usually work for these companies, they make a bunch of money doing this. They'll say, well, AIs, we can train them to be nice to us. And yeah, they'll be smarter than us, but they'll help us. And as a biologist, my response is, can somebody please give me an example in the last 400 million years of a apex predator that evolved that was more intelligent than another predator that didn't dominate and decimate that population, or at least be subject to Malthusian dynamics? And I think it's really, really arrogant of humans to think that they can control AIs and force them to help us when they're smarter than us. And I'd love, y'all are all medical scientists and biologists as well, and I'd like to hear your view. Do you think there's such a thing as a species that could be smarter than you, but benevolent and nice, and you could control it? Is that even a possible thing? I wish Ed Wilson was still alive to be on this call with us and respond to that.
Well, I think
Rob, you touched
your
on
worry stops progress. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, and it's not going to stop. And you can say, we will no longer do any more research in computers. Think about what life was like in 1967 when I was trying to learn how to program with Fortran, and I didn't know really what the hell I was doing. But now computers have created our world. As we sped everything up, it's brought things closer together. It's made people more angry. It's given all sorts of problems, as well as the benefits. And so it's going to, the human mind is very inventive, and it will continue to invent things, even if it invents an anti-AI program. Then they can fight the wars between themselves, AI and anti-AI. But you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle now that it's out. And you can't.
We agree.
You're not going
I
to
agree
stop
with you.
research.
Not going to stop it. Yeah, that's true. Not going to stop it. It's too late.
Rob, you touched on the fear of jobs replacing. How do you think that's going to affect? How do you think that is going to affect college students choosing careers?
It's a great question. I remember when I was in high school, I had that calculator that I showed a picture of, the HP 48GX, and I remember when I realized that it was better than me at arithmetic, and I had this moment of just depression. I was so sad, and my consolation, I consoled myself by saying, "Well, at least I'm good at other things that it can't do, lots of other things." So I got over it pretty quick. I think it's much tougher now. And I see it with the people that work for me, these young, wonderful biologists that come out of Berkeley and Stanford that I hire in their early 20s. And we're all sitting around the table typing in questions to ChatGPT, trying to get answers. And they're all looking for jobs. I had one really promising young lady that worked for me that's just brilliant. And she ended up leaving to go be a bartender, because she decided that she wanted to work on something tangible with people that couldn't be easily replaced. Because you're not going to replace bartenders with computers. You could pour a drink with a robot, but nobody wants that. People want the interaction with the bartender. So I thought it was a really smart move for her, to seek out a career that valued the human interaction.
How long do you think she'll stick with it?
She's already trying to do a startup. She's now working on a food related startup, but it was inspired by her bartending, and she's doing something with organic fungus, like kombucha or something. I don't know. I think she'll make millions of dollars.
Rob, what about the issue of compensating the people that have developed the input data for AI, like the copyright's long since run on Shakespeare, but not on a lot of current material?
I love the fact that John Grisham and J.K. Rowling and all those just sued OpenAI. I hope they kick their butts. I think it's ridiculous if you spend your whole life coming up with these wonderful novels and then wake up one day and this machine can just, beat you at it. It'd be one thing if it didn't train on your work, but if it trains on your work, come on. It's just, I realize the lawyers in the room probably would say that's fair use copyright, the definition of fair use. But in my mind, human creativity needs to be respected. Now, the counterpoint to that is it's like sampling from hip hop and rap in the 80s. They had the same debate. People got really mad at rappers for sampling, but it turned into a big art form that it then became respected on its own. So I think there's two sides to that story.
Rob, is it presumptuous to suggest that AI, having learned from humans, also learned maliciousness from humans and use maliciousness where it will be most effective for them?
Absolutely, and that was my response earlier about hallucinating. Same thing. A kind of a mediocre doctor might hallucinate on a diagnosis, and the AI will hallucinate also with a diagnosis. In the same way, bad behavior, it's just trained on human input. So all those Shakespeare novels, Machiavelli, everything that is trained on there's inherent bad behavior in that. I agree with you, Ron.
So is the difference between human intelligence and AI one of simply volume?
I would, based on that earlier slide where I had all those columns, the different domains, I would say it's both volume, like you said. So, you can ask a really smart historian who studied, modern European history from 1910 to current, and they'll answer maybe almost as good as the AI. But if you ask that same historian about the history of Peru, they might not know. So that would be supporting your statement that it's really about just more volume. But I think it's also, the real meat of it, in my mind, of this definition of intelligence is that it can go across domains. So you can train these AIs now on medicine and law and art and history, and it will help it with political science. So that's the idea that, knowledge is all intertwined, right? And so it's getting very, very good at that. And I think it's approaching human, not quite there yet, but it's approaching humans' ability to generalize from one domain to another.
But again,
I'll give you an example. You guys are clinicians. A lot of you are clinicians. You've had a lot of training with your hands to work with patients. And I bet if you put most of you, the ones of you who've done that in a wood shop and ask you to make a tool or use a tool to make something, even if you've never had experience, you could probably, your brain will figure out how to do an okay job at it. So that's domain adaptation. And I think the computers are getting very good at that.
Rob, you talked about the input. How to put the information into the AI takes a great amount of work. Does it absorb from vocal as well as the written? In other words, can it take a picture and absorb, for example, a novel? You have to go through every page, or how does it go through a medical textbook and absorb all of that information?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer to your question is yes, it can do images and text. And if you want to think like a computer, it'll take, for example, a book that I don't have a book here to show you, but if you had a book, we open it and read from left to right and go through pages, but just picture taking all those letters and just putting them in a giant long string, just one long, mile long string, and it just feeds it all into the memory of the system. If you have an image somewhere in there, you could picture an image as a rasterized set of dots, right? You zoom in with your microscope, you can see the little dots for an image, different colors. They call them pixels, right? I think pixels. Like on a dot matrix or a laser jet printer, you can see the dots. It'll take each of those dots and read them. So it'll have red, 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 green, green, red, red, green, green with different intensities. And it'll read them in as numbers. It'll take a photo of them and change the color into a number and read it all in. So to the computer, it just sees a giant string of numbers from the picture. The same thing with speech. So if it were recording this call and been training on this call, it would take my voice and your voices. It would do something called speech to text. So it'd be like a transcript. You guys have all seen that when you get a voicemail and your phone will show you the text. It'll take in the text and it'll learn on that. It can train on videos like YouTube. Does it the same way I mentioned for images with the little the rasterized numbers, but now it's just every if there's 16 frames per second like there is in a movie, it'll just chain together thousands of images and then read those in sequentially. So it knows it can turn a video into data. All of it is, and whatever the input is, whether it's text, speech, video, audio, it turns it all into a string of either letters or numbers, and that is the data that it trains on.
For example, if one person inputs a book and another one inputs a book, does all of that go into one wherever it's stored, whatever storage?
Great question. So each company has their own model. So at OpenAI, the Chat GPT company, they'll have a big room. It's here in San Francisco, right across the bay from me, and there'll be thousands of computers, and everything it trains on, like if they put Shakespeare and John Grisham and a podcast and some text and some images, it'll all go into the memory of that one room. And then if you later today type a prompt in, a question, that question will get sent to that room. It'll search all the network. It creates what's called a network with weights, and it'll use those weights to give you back a response. And everybody in the world is hitting that same room. Now, I mean, they might make copies of that room because they get a lot of load, so they can serve more people. But that's the idea. Google will have their own version. For Google has Google Gemini. It's a different model. And they'll have the exact same thing at Google, but it'll be a different computer trained on slightly different inputs. Maybe one of them has all of Wikipedia. Maybe the other company might use only half of Wikipedia, like that. There's probably 5 big companies that each have their own open chat GPT type thing, and each of them have so there's like 5 big models in the world right now.
So one company's AI could give a different answer than another company's AI based on the information inputted.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You're 100% right. And they have competitions between these companies. So they've set up formal competitions to see which AI is better. And they'll ask them both the same question and compare them. And they'll cheat, they'll train off each other. One company will ask the other company and see if they can do better. That's how they're training. That's why it's progressing so quickly.
Be good if they can all combine. Thank you.
When you started talking about the large language models for us, and one of the things you did was get kind of a primitive one, a Wikipedia, a Wikipedia and Quora. And we all know that Wikipedia is not perfect. And I guess, okay, is that my screen that's doing the projection?
I think maybe an AI took over Nancy's screen.
But my question is this. I know things are moving very, very quickly in AI. There were problems with some of the original data sets that were being used. One of the most egregious examples was when it was used for selecting job applicants for jobs. And it turned out that some of the databases that were being used had implicit bias in terms of jobs that they thought women could do today. But wherever they got the information, it was 20, 25 years old. And also there were biases against African-American candidates and people of color based on their first name. But I guess my question is this: as time has gone on, I mean, there's probably thousands of these large language models around and databases. Has the accuracy of these models improved at a great pace? Are they much better able to predict and give good results than they might have been able to do several years? Now, I know today, in the early days, a lot of the information was open source, wasn't it? And today, I'm guessing that the models that you're using to develop pharmaceuticals and do drug research you purchase them most likely. Because you must have to have a model that uses a chemistry for molecular design and so forth. What do you think is the status of these models now? Do you think most of them are accurate?
Wow, it's such a great question, and I generally agree with most of the way you presented this. I think probably let me see. Actually, I think there's a screen sharing problem here. Nancy's sharing. Let me do this.
Well, wait, maybe if I turned it off, should I just turn the screen share off?
There you go. Yeah, perfect. I think we're good.
Okay.
So I think it's a great question, Mary, and I think my quick answer would be two things. One is, yes, the models have gotten better and more accurate over time, but they're also able to answer a lot more questions. So there's a lot more opportunity for them to be wrong. So a lot of the errors that you would have experienced in 2019, they're not going to make those same mistakes. They'll be accurate. But then you can ask it so many more questions that it gives it so many more chances to be wrong. Google just had an embarrassment where they were asking about, if you ask the image generator to show you a picture of a World War II Nazi soldier, it showed a black guy wearing a helmet and in a Nazi German outfit. And Google got in a lot of trouble for that because they're trying to be diversity aware and all that, but then they propose these preposterous responses. It's a hard problem. And I think to the point we had earlier, we were talking about it's trained on human data, and humans, it's learning some of this bad behavior, and whether it's racism or misogyny or whatever it is, it's learning it from humans and human texts and writings.
Yeah.
So it's a tough problem.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing? This is just a personal opinion. I think one of the biggest perils is the smaller and smaller percentage of Americans that understand artificial intelligence at all. And I'm thinking that very often people in positions of power, people who are executives and so forth, are bedazzled by the idea of AI and using it, but don't really understand how it works. And I think that's dangerous.
I completely agree with you. And I would like to say no one understands how it works. I mean, no one. And anybody that tells you they do is full of it. Yeah. Jeff Hinton, who created all the new models that we use today, when people ask him how it works, he really readily admits, he's like, I don't know. It's a lot like he made an ant farm. If you have an ant farm and you're trying to make an ant farm and the ants aren't able to climb up. Remember those ant farms we used to have as kids, where they're like a big plastic thing in a maze they could climb up. And if the ants can't climb up, you could change the design of it to make it like, oh, I see, they can't quite make it here, so I'm going to change design. And you might play with the design of it to where all the ants can finally live and reproduce and live in this ant farm. But if you ask the person who did that, do you understand how the ants actually think or behave, or what do the ants do? They'll have no idea. It's not like by making an ant farm that works, you understand how an ant's neurons work. That's not the case at all. And the same thing is true here. Jeff Hinton and these really smart computer scientists design systems that could learn, but they don't actually understand what they're learning. They just know how to make the system through back propagation of losses is the way they did it. It's very conducive to the system ending up being intelligent, but they don't. If you ask the smartest computer scientists in the world, if they understand how exactly the intelligence works in these systems, they'll say, no, we do not. It's an emergent phenomenon. So I completely agree with you. And I think the real danger is, again, the arrogance of humans saying that we understand this stuff when we clearly don't.
Thank you.
We should be afraid of humans because we don't understand how the brain works. We don't understand how the neurons and axons in the brain create personality.
I will vote for you for president. I think
we don't understand ourselves.
Right, you're right. You're 100% right. I completely agree with you. I think you turn on the news and we are afraid. There's a lot of bad things that happen.
Well, does that mean we should stop reproducing?
I think we should be more responsible about it, for sure.
Get into that argument, but
I mean, parents should be. Yeah, gosh, don't get me started. I mean, I wish everybody would take parenting classes and learn and be thoughtful and try to raise great kids. And I mean, I think it's really sad that we have, anyway, that's another topic for another talk.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to bring that specifically up for that purpose, but if we're afraid of what we don't know, then we should be afraid of ourselves, because we certainly don't know how the brain works.
I completely agree with you. And I think I agree. I 100% agree.
Oh, I know.
And I think my friend Alexei Navalny would also agree with you. Just right. Sorry to interrupt you,
Late
Willie.
friend.
Yeah.
One is exposed to lots of articles that say comment on the prejudice or whatever in feeding or creating artificial intelligence. Is that of no significance if you're dealing in pure scientific knowledge? Or can any of that be subject to it?
Well, I mean, I think it's a gradient. I mean, it's a gray area. For example, if you talk about medical diagnoses, scientific knowledge, and you start adding in race into that, ethnicity into that, you'll end up with bias. And I guess if you're confident that you're going to feed only actual peer-reviewed data sources into the model, you probably can feel a little better about it. But we all know that there's a lot of falsification of data in scientific publications as well. So
what about in your stuff if you're looking at drugs?
For protein folding, I think you're pretty safe. Stuff like that, because that's math. I mean, that's pretty hard. There's not really bias there. Yeah, I mean, we saw error. The system can be wrong, but I don't think it'll just, it doesn't hallucinate in the same way.
But now there's a lot of concern that all the medical data that we have is biased because they didn't check out that many women in some of the studies. And if they did check out the women, they didn't have a full racial mix. And so now they're saying you've got to correct that problem.
It's a big problem, and it's a huge problem. If you train only on data for men writing, then your AI is going to sound a lot like a man and be biased towards men. If you overcompensate and try to fix it and force the system to answer to weight its answers towards women, then it's going to also be inaccurate. It's a tough problem.
Yes, it gives new meaning to the old phrase "garbage in, garbage out."
Exactly. Oh, there's a lot of garbage. Lots of garbage.
Rob, where does the United States stand in the commercial development of AI with respect to other countries? And do we have any problems in sourcing components that we need from countries like China and Taiwan?
That's a great question, Don. I'm not a huge expert on it. The little bit that I know is that the U.S. is definitely the leader in AI. One of the biggest, there's big concerns about TSMC, which is a big Taiwanese chip maker. So, there's that whole mainland versus Taiwan political instability situation. And the U.S. has been looking at that lately. So far, the U.S. is way in the lead just because so many of the technologies were invented here. That will change. China is a powerhouse, and their universities are there's tons of students that came over here and learned from these great minds here and have taken that technology back to China, and they're very innovative, very hardworking people. So there is no doubt that gap is going to close. And the U.S. has taken steps. I've seen quite a few steps in the last 6 months to try to limit the acquisition of companies and chips from China and Russia purchasing from the U.S. But like anything, it's just temporary. That'll equilibrate.
Okay, well, thank you so much, sir. And I think that we'll wrap it up unless there's a last question. One more question? No? Okay, thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you,
And we
guys.
look,
Really appreciate it.
we look forward to an update next year. How's that?
The AI will update you guys. I'll just have the AI come on and talk next year. I'll be sailing. I'm going to get a boat with off-grid solar panels. See you guys.
Thanks,
All right.
Rob.
I'm going to
Thank you.
close off this meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Great job.